أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. A very, very warm welcome to everyone who is following my channel. I have been away for quite some time, I know, and I want to just say that I very much appreciate all of the messages which I have received over the last few months of encouragement and general support and many, many requests to resume my various series and lectures on YouTube. And so I'm very happy to be back. I have been extremely, extremely busy. I do not, I'm not a full-time so-called YouTuber or content creator or influencer. I am first and foremost a scholar. And so I am ultimately motivated in everything that I do by the unceasing quest for knowledge, and of course also imparting that knowledge to whoever is interested in this so-called content. We're getting back to a lot of things, and I'm going to be shooting about 20 separate videos, which will be released over the next several weeks and probably about this, mainly this academic year. As an academic, I think in terms of the academic year. So do stay tuned. And I thought that I would just do a very simple video right now about some of my books. A lot of my library videos have been very much appreciated, and I do have lots of books. Recently, I had to move some of my books from one storage to another. It's quite a process, but I've been doing this my whole life. I've lived all over the world moving my books around, and so in the course of that, I managed to retrieve some dictionaries, and so my video today is devoted to dictionaries. Yes, I do collect dictionaries. There was a friend of mine many, many years ago back in Malaysia, Ajmal Abdul Razak, rahimahullah. He's no longer in this world. May Allah have mercy on his soul. He was a very kind and wonderful man. And he also always used to tell his friends, Dr. Nizamuddin collects dictionaries. And as a result, he started his own dictionary collection. He himself was also an extremely erudite man, and he translated the entire Masnavi of Jalaluddin Rumi into the Malay language. That's quite an achievement. If you're interested in Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, I did a separate video called the Rumi Reading List, so do refer to that. So yes, dictionaries. Why are dictionaries? Why do I collect dictionaries? In the final analysis, human communication is based on words. Words are very, very important. And words constitute the lexical encapsulation of meaning. If we do not understand words, we do not understand concepts. We cannot really communicate effectively. I'm very interested in logic, and one of the things we study in logic is the first act of the mind, which is concept formation or simple apprehension. And so concepts logically, in logical sequence, they precede words. But once a word has been coined, once a coinage has come into being, whether by a human being or through an act of the divine. And yes, those of you who follow my channel, I'm a believer, I'm a Muslim. And so there are various theories also in the Muslim tradition, about the origin of language. Is it divine, or is it through a matter purely of convention or coinage? The answer is it's both, but ultimately the human being is distinguished by the capacity for the by the capacity for cognizing universals. Excuse me for the stutter there. And it's really only the human being that is capable of thinking in universal abstract concepts, and those are then expressed in words. This is why it's very important to have an understanding of what words mean, how they have been used historically, and there are many, many dictionaries. And so I'm not just interested in dictionaries, but I'm also interested in lexicography. Cat is coming into the frame here. I have lots of cats. So I was talking about lexicography. Lexicography is the writing, the compilation of dictionaries. This is also a subject. I should have brought that book, but I've left it out on another shelf. But it's called Empire. No, not Empire. Chasing the Sun. It's a history of lexicography. You may look into it. The first dictionaries or early dictionaries or some version of dictionaries or word lists probably that were ever written were in ancient Babylon. They are word lists, giving equivalences between Sumerian, which is a linguistic isolate, very strange and unusual language, and what scholars call Akkadian. And you have, of course, different historical periods of Akkadian, which are often distinguished by the two major so-called dialects, Assyrian and Babylonian, if I'm not mistaken. But those are among the oldest, I suppose, glossaries or dictionaries that you could find. I think we've already once done a video where we talked about the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. And so I was talking about moving my book collection from one storage to another, and I managed to retrieve one of my favorite dictionaries, which I had been wondering about for a while. And that is a very interesting book. And it consists of 14 volumes. It is in the Urdu language. It is called Muhazzabul Lughat. Muhazzabul Lughat by Muhazzab Lakhnawi. And it is the best, in my view, Urdu to Urdu dictionary ever compiled. There's not a lot of Urdu dictionaries. I'm aware that there is another Urdu dictionary which has been published in Pakistan, more on historical principles. But this is a unique work, the Muhazzab al-Lughat. This was the work of one man, and it really encapsulates the Urdu language, especially as it has been spoken in Lucknow, as opposed to Delhi. And for almost every entry, he gives a citation from Urdu poetry. So this is a marvelous book. If Urdu is your language, or if it's a language that you're learning, you really should acquire this. It's not very expensive, but I think you can only get it in India. I bought it in Lucknow some decades ago, more than 20, 25 years ago. So this is one of my favorite dictionaries, and it's quite fun. I like reading dictionaries. I remember when I was in the third grade, I learned about Malcolm X and how when he was in prison, to improve his English, he started reading the dictionary. And so I remember my father gave me a paperback Webster's English to English dictionary when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I started reading it, inspired by Malcolm X. And I found it to be quite a fascinating exercise. And then I stopped after some time. I don't know how long I kept up with it, but I always liked dictionaries, and I would flip around with them. And when I was young, we had 3 dictionaries at home. There was this paperback that my father got for me, and then he had 2 larger Webster's English to English dictionaries, and they were really masterpieces. Back in the day, you know, they had, most of them that were published in America had the entire text of the U.S. Constitution. So I read that at an early age, and it's a very interesting but very flawed document, but that's another subject. And they often had the weirdest charts and, you know, metric to customary conversions and all sorts of weird tabular information. And in those days, they also had almanacs. There would be an almanac published every year. And this was a different time. This was before the internet. Things were very, very different. And that's why dictionaries are important, because we have entered an age in which words are manipulated and concepts are manipulated. And we are in a situation now where this kind of full spectrum dominance of the knowledge space, let's call it, is unprecedented in human history. You know, people are very impressed with DeepSeek and Grok and ChatGPT and all this, and this is relatively new to me, but in the last year I've been experimenting with it, and I find it to be an extremely dangerous thing. For example, I did some math problems. I asked ChatGPT to do some math problems using the law of cosines, and ChatGPT did them wrong. They added where they should have, the AI added where it should have subtracted and things like this, and there are other situations. But when you control, I mean, AI, it's all a question of what you train the AI on. So you're controlling the data that it's trained on, and so you control the discourse. It's really quite sinister. And I mean, this has been going on for a very long time. There's a lot of talk in the media right now about some chap by the name of Epstein. Perhaps you've heard of him. Well, he was closely associated with another chap by the name of Robert Maxwell and his little girl, Ghislaine. And Robert Maxwell actually was a publisher back in the day, and he owned a press called Pergamon Press. Pergamon was an ancient city where they invented parchment, and it had a library rivaling the ancient Great Library of Alexandria, hence he chose the name. And they were primarily a scientific and medical publisher. and they published a lot of books. So when you become a publisher and you control all of these different sorts of series and presses, and you control journals, academic journals in medicine and science, so you become a gatekeeper, but you also are able to hoover up, as they say in Britain, or vacuum up all sorts of knowledge. And that puts you in a position of extreme power, but language itself is being manipulated. There's a book that came out many years ago called Plastic Words: The Tyranny of a Modular Language by Purkson, the German guy. It's quite an interesting book. And he talks about how a kind of fake language has been invented. When was this published? 1995. And you see it, especially in the corporate world. All sorts of jargon has come into usage. And he first noticed this, and as a linguist, he wrote this very interesting book. So there's a lot of things to get through today, so I'm not going to speak too much about this. But this is the situation. The first person to notice this was George Orwell, in a very famous essay which he wrote called On the Politics of the English Language, which I think is 1946 or 48. It's a very early essay where he talks about how especially in his novel 1984, war is peace and peace is war, and so now we're living in an age where genocide is compassion and compassion is genocide. Although this is going on. So it's very important to understand language and meaning. There's a very interesting book by a very controversial author. He's controversial for all the wrong reasons. I think people should be allowed to say whatever they want to say. It's called Twilight Language by Michael Hoffman. And it's kind of a sequel to an earlier book he wrote called Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. Both very interesting books. Sometimes Mr. Hoffman writes very well. Other times his books are often collections of different things that he's written over the years that are not necessarily tied together very well. That's a minor criticism that only addresses readability. But otherwise, he has some very interesting insights on how language is used as a method of control. Another interesting book that came out again many years ago, which I first heard about actually from Mr. Hoffman through something he posted online years and years ago, called The Gutenberg Elegies: The Fate of Reading in an Electronic Age. This is an old book. It's by a guy named Sven Berkertz. This book came out in 1994. And it's quite an interesting book. He was quite prescient in that he saw the dangers of the growing internet, the World Wide Web. In 1994, the web was nothing like it is now. It was much more small scale. And he wrote a piece in this called Into the Electronic Millennium, where he says, some years ago, this is page 117, a friend and I co-managed a used and rare bookshop in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We were often asked to appraise and purchase libraries by retiring academics, widows, and disgruntled graduate students. One day, we took a call from a professor of English at one of the community colleges outside Detroit. When he answered the buzzer, I did a double take. He looked to be only a year or two older than we were. I'm selling everything, he said, leading the way through a large apartment. As he opened the floor of his study, I felt a nudge from my partner. The room was wall-to-wall books and as neat as a chapel. The professor had a remarkable collection. It reflected not only the needs of his vocation, he taught 19th and 20th century literature, but a book lover's sensibility as well. Sensibility is very important. The shelves were strictly arranged and the books themselves were in superb condition. When he left the room, we set to work, inspecting, counting, and estimating. This is always a delicate procedure, for the buyer is at once anxious to avoid insult to the seller and eager to get the goods for the best price. We adopted our usual strategy, working out a lower offer and a more generous fallback price, but there was no need to worry. The professor took our first offer without batting an eye. As we boxed up the books, we chatted. My partner asked the man if he was moving. No, he said, but I am getting out. We both looked up. Out of the teaching business? He said, no, I mean out of books. He then said that he wanted to show us something, and indeed, as soon as the books were packed and loaded, he took us back through the apartment and down a set of stairs. When we reached the basement, he flicked on the light. there on a long table, displayed like an exhibit in the Space Museum, was a computer. I didn't know what kind it was then, nor could I tell you now 15 years later. But the professor was keen to explain and demonstrate. So if that's 15 years later and the book came out in 1994, then that took place in the 80s. So that shows you where we are now. Most people simply do not read. And they can't be bothered to read anything. They'll go on DeepSeek or ChatGPT and ask the AI to summarize it for them. And there's all sorts of apps that have come out. I don't even know their names. I don't want to use them. That are there just for note-taking and simplifying and everything like this. I mean, in my own academic life, I have rarely even used a graduate assistant. And when I have, it's always to go and get something photocopied or something like that. I do my work myself. There are even people out there now who hire people to do this. And you can be sure that people who are hired to do that are using AI. There are many, it's not just students, it's many, many academics as well. Some of them known to me personally, who use AI to do their work, to make up exams, to do quizzes, to make up all sorts of course materials. And the students are using AI. So we're entering the phase in history where we have a kind of epistemic colonialism which is taking place. The realm of knowledge and thought itself is being occupied and colonized. There is a kind of total hegemony which very sinister people like Peter Thiel, people like Elon Musk, people like the absolutely disgusting and despicable Bill Gates and other tasteless tech bros that are out there inflicting their technology on the whole world. We have entered into a situation where almost nobody knows anything anymore, and if they know something, they don't know why they know it. They'll say, well, and they'll say something, they'll spout off some sort of fact or present some sort of theory, and then you ask them, how did you come to this conclusion? Where did you get that? Oh, online. Where online? I read it somewhere online. I read it somewhere online. I hear this constantly. I read it somewhere online. Read it online? Just read it online? What is this nonsense? So people have no understanding now of these things. And anyway, to come back to dictionaries. So dictionaries are extremely, extremely important. And I have a collection of dictionaries, and it's not just English, like the Oxford English Dictionary is sort of the last word as far as I'm concerned as a dictionary on historical principles for the English language. But there are many other things which you need, especially if you write or if you actually read real books. So one of the standard things which I refer to constantly in my reading and writing is the Roget's International Thesaurus. And this is the fourth edition. I don't like many of the later editions. I think it was good until about the sixth or seventh edition. And what I mean by this is, you see these little thumb things here? So what if you want to know a word that is close to another word? Oh, I took off the mic by accident. Yeah, if you want to know another word close to another word, so you just flip through here, and let's say you want a word for knowledge. So you turn to knowledge, K-N-O, etc., and then you'll find that it'll talk about knowledge in its semantic range. So you have familiarity, information, intelligence, learning. And then there will be a number. So let's say we are looking for a word close to knowledge in the sense of intelligence, and it gives us 467.1. Then you go over here to 467.1. I went a bit too far. 467.1. So you have intelligence and wisdom is 467 is the general semantic range. Then 0.1, it tells intelligence, understanding, comprehension, apprehension, sense, wit, etc., etc., etc. And so you have other nuances like smartness, braininess, 0.3, shrewdness, that was 0.2, 0.4, sagacity, and so on and so forth. This is extremely useful, and you say, well, you can just look that up online. Yeah, you can. I suppose you could. It's just like the calculator, I suppose. It's dulled people's minds, but this is an extremely useful, and it's very interesting to read about who Dr. Roget was. He was a medical doctor who was, again, interested in compiling lists, and he came up with this concept of the thesaurus. So strictly speaking, it's not a dictionary, but it is an important work of reference. This is another very useful book. You can get this used for like $5-6. Funk and Wagnall's Standard Handbook of Synonyms, Antonyms, and Prepositions. Again, the work of one man, James C. Fernald. This was recommended to me by one of my old friends. He said this is quite useful, and I quite agree with him. There are certain words which cannot be translated between languages. And I came across this very strange book called The Dictionary of Untranslatables, a Philosophical Lexicon, which itself originally was written in French and then translated. But it has all sorts of interesting words in it, like words that can't be translated into English, or there's no exact equivalent. Things like Schadenfreude or Sprezzatura, or words like that. This is very interesting work. And I also have a very interesting reference. I'm interested, as you can tell, by language, but language also has a visual dimension, in the sense that there are visual symbols, writing systems of various kinds. There's alphabets, there's abjads, there's abugidas, there's logographic writing systems. There are many, many different ways to represent sounds in English in symbolic form. And I think that the study of writing systems and the visual representation of language is somewhat neglected in linguistics. But the works of this Romanian scholar, Florin Kulmas, are quite interesting. And he, many years ago, compiled this fascinating book called the Blackwell Encyclopedia of Writing Systems. This is really fantastic. And it's quite fun just to flip through it. I have, from an early age, been fascinated by writing systems and secret codes and hieroglyphs and things like that. You just open it up, any random page, and there's all these very bizarre and peculiar writing systems. And this is a pretty comprehensive book. It has a more of a linguistic approach. There is another book which came out around the same time by a scholar of the Semitic languages by the name of Peter T. Daniels, which I don't have, called The World's Writing Systems. I do not have this book, but it has, at least at the time that it came out, every single writing system known to man. So it's all in there. Cuneiform, Hangul, the Korean writing system, the Japanese writing system, which is, I think the Japanese writing system is considered to be the most complex writing system that's still in use. Yes, more than Chinese. Why more than Chinese? Well, because it's a hybrid system. It uses a huge number of Chinese characters, excuse me, which are in Japanese are called kanji, and then it has its own syllabic writing system called hiragana, which is only used for Japanese words, and then it has a syllabic writing system which is only used for foreign words called katakana, and then they also sometimes, for totally English words or words which they want to make them sound English or appear English, they write in the Latin alphabet, which they call romaji. So it's extremely difficult. Back in the day, I learned spoken Japanese pretty well, but written Japanese was really, really hard, and I really didn't pursue it with much seriousness for very long. But Chinese, in that sense, is actually easier than Japanese as a writing system, or less complex. So if you're really interested in Chinese dictionaries, this is the Kangxi Dictionary. The Kangxi Zitian, I think is how it's pronounced. It's compiled by the Kangxi Emperor, who died in 1722. He was the third emperor of the Manchu Qing dynasty and reigned from 1661 to 1722. He ordered the compilation of this dictionary, and it was begun in 1710, and then it was finally published in 1716. This is a facsimile of it. It's a very small size facsimile. I bought this in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, long ago. And I mean, it's just absolutely exquisite. And the pages are really, really, I mean, the characters are so tiny. You got to use a magnifying glass, but it's great fun. It's a beautiful dictionary. I really, really do like it. Oh, here's a note in Arabic on when I bought this. Yeah, I bought this on a Monday. Oh no, it doesn't say Monday. Oh no, yeah. Yeah, I bought this on August 25th. Interestingly enough, 2005. Sometimes I note these that kind of information down in my books, and sometimes I don't. I've been very inconsistent in that, but when you do, and then you see it years later, you think, "Wow, time has really passed." So if you're not really in the business of, obviously, you need to know these characters to be able to read this. So that takes a while to learn. If you're not there yet, then you should start with this. This is based on the Kanchi dictionary, and it's very, very useful. It's just called Chinese Characters, a Genealogy and Dictionary. And they have a website too. It's very good. And you can see the whole genealogy of Chinese characters. It's quite fun. So as you can tell, I like to read dictionaries. Sometimes I do just grab one of my dictionaries, sometimes at random, and just spend an hour or two just flipping through it and reading things. You'd be surprised at the kind of things you can learn. It's really quite fun. So on that note, there's also the American Heritage Dictionary, which is a standalone dictionary, has gone into tracing what are called Indo-European roots. And so there's something called the American Heritage Dictionary of Indo-European Roots. It's quite interesting. If you are interested in linguistics, there's this idea in historical linguistics that there are resemblances between languages, much like family resemblances, and so they posit certain macro families. So there's something called the Indo-European languages. English is one of those. So is German. And then you have subfamilies like the Romance languages, the ones that derive from Latin. So that would be French and Spanish and Italian and Romanian and Portuguese. And so these are reconstructed roots. And so if you're interested in the deep origin and etymology of words, this is really, really indispensable. There's another book of this kind by someone named Carl Darling Buck, which is another dictionary of Indo-European roots. So if you are interested in linguistics, there's a lot of terminology in linguistics. I'm just sort of going through almost at random some of my favorite dictionaries. I have the Dictionary of Linguistics and Phonetics. I use this a lot because I'm very interested in languages. But then I have very specialized dictionaries. So, I'm very interested in the occult sciences. So I have an Encyclopedia of Occultism by Lewis Spence. It's really nice. It came in a box. It says here, a compendium of information on the occult sciences, occult personalities, psychic science, magic, demonology, spiritism, mysticism, and metaphysics. And this is the actual book. It's a nice, solid, hard cover. And you can just open it up at random. And like, here's hypnotism. Big entry on hypnotism. Hydromancy. Howling of dogs. Weird stuff. Hocus pocus. There's an entry. Words of magical import, which by some are believed to be derived from Ochus Bochus, a magician and demon of the north, etc. So this is an old book, though. I don't know where. I found this in some used bookshop, as one often does. And there's all sorts of really interesting plates as well. Here's a diagram of the mythology of macrocosm and microcosm. A lot of interesting. This is all before the internet. So this is what you would do back in the day before the internet. If you wanted to just, a lot of people just search their favorite websites and hang out online. But back in the day, people would go to libraries. And you could walk around, and I like typefaces too. Look at how nice that cover they did, the typeface, and the composition of the cover and so forth. So I wanted to see when this was published. This is University Books, Hyde Park, New York, 1960. So this is a pretty old book, but there's a newer book, which is quite good. Very expensive book, published by E.J. Brill, called The Dictionary of Gnosis and Western Esotericism. And these are big names who have contributed to this volume in the study of Western esotericism. People like Wouter Hanegraaff, sounds very Dutch, Antoine Fever, he's obviously French, and other people. This book was actually given to me as a gift a long time back at AUC by one of my colleagues there. Copyright 2006. Another more modern book along these lines is A Dictionary of Symbols by Juan Eduardo, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, Cirlo, maybe. And I actually bought this book in Charlottesville, Virginia, at a bookshop there. Yeah, this is a very interesting book. It was originally written 1969, but this is 2011 reissue. And this guy was a sort of independent scholar, but he was heavily indebted to people like Carl Jung, Mircea Eliade, and René Guénon. And that's what caught my eye on the back cover. That's why I bought it. Because as you know, I'm very interested in René Guénon. But I also mentioned Eliade. Eliade is an interesting figure. He was influenced by Guénon. I'm planning to do a Mircea Eliade reading list as well. He's a very important scholar of comparative religion, or the history of religions, religious studies. So I'll be doing a video on that at some point. I also have some other dictionaries, many Arabic dictionaries. By way of example, this is the Dictionary of Sufi Terms by Abd al-Razzaq al-Kashani, who died in the year 736 of the Hijrah. It's called Islahat al-Sufiya in Arabic. This is an excellent critical edition edited by the contemporary Iranian scholar Majid Hadizadeh. And this was published in Iran by Intisharat-i-Hikmat. And it's quite a nice book. It's a standard reference for Sufi terms. There is some kind of an English translation of this, as I recall. I probably have a PDF somewhere, but I don't own the book. I mean, I can read it in Arabic. So, other kinds of specialized dictionaries I have. So, in Islamic philosophy, there's a very important figure named Shihabuddin as-Suhrawardi. Now, he uses a lot of peculiar terms. Philosophers often have their own coinages, but he had some very interesting ones. And so I have a dictionary of the philosophical terms used by Shihabuddin as-Suhrawardi. It's called Farhang Istilahat Asar Sheikh Ishraq Shihabuddin Yahya as-Suhrawardi by Sayyid Muhammad Khalid Ghaffari. This book is in Persian. It's actually a mix of Persian and Arabic because the terms are mainly in Arabic. There are some in Persian as well. I purchased this in Iran in 2003, I think. It came out in 2001. It has an English page as well. You can see. The Arabic language is really amazing. I don't think there is a more detailed and comprehensive linguistic tradition until modern times. The Arabs are people who wrote in Arabic. The Muslims, this is in the Islamic period, obviously. There were plenty of people of non-Arab origin who contributed to Arabic linguistics, but the description of the language and the techniques used, they even engaged in field work, and the kind of dictionaries and things that were compiled is truly astonishing. So you have the first dictionary in the Arabic language was compiled by someone named Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi, who was the teacher of Sibawayh. If you've heard of Sibawayh, Sibawayh is considered the codifier of Arabic grammar. He wrote the first book on Arabic grammar, Sibawayh, and he simply called it the book, Al-Kitab. Well, Al-Khalil was his teacher, and the book is basically just full of quotations from his teacher. And Al-Khalil died in the Hijrah year 170. 170, that's, in other words, he died about 14 centuries ago. And so his was the first real dictionary in Arabic. There are others. There's Mukhtar al-Sihah. There's Al-Qamus al-Muhit by al-Firuzabadi. I've got all these here. This is kind of a standard go-to dictionary called Al-Qamus al-Muhit in Arabic. But the book, which is considered the premier Arabic dictionary, is the one called Lisan al-Arab, which I've got here. Lisan al-Arab. This is in 18 volumes. This is the premier go-to dictionary in the Arabic language. You've really got to use this. There was a book that was written later by someone named Murtada al-Zabidi, which is called Taj al-Urus min Jawahir al-Qamus, which is a massive expansion of this. And if you buy that dictionary, it's also about 20-volume work. Murtada al-Zabidi was originally from India. And there was another extraordinary person who came much later, who originally was a Christian, but he converted to Islam. His name was Ahmad Faris al-Shiddiaq. And he had a lot of criticisms of this work, the Qamus as well as the one by al-Zabidi. This is a different one. And so he wrote a critique of this entire dictionary. And it's called Al-Jasus ala al-Qamus. It's an absolutely beautiful book. It was published in 1299 of the Hijrah in Constantinople, Istanbul. So it even says here, one of the names is Constantinople. And it was published at the expense of an Indian royal by the name of Siddiq Hasan Khan of Bhopal. He acknowledges him in the beginning of the book. And this is a very thorough critique, not just of Murtada al-Zabidi's Taj al-Urus min Jawahir al-Qamus, but also, of course, by extension, the Qamus al-Muhit by al-Firuzabadi, but is a critique of the whole tradition of lexicography in the Muslim world. And Ahmad Faris al-Shiddiaq was quite interesting. He actually memorized the whole Quran even as a Christian. And later he converted to Islam, and other people sort of dispute, no, he didn't convert. He definitely converted to Islam if you read his books. He definitely did. And he also traveled in Europe. He traveled in the UK as well, and oddly enough, he was involved at some point in the translation of the Bible into the Arabic language. So he was an extremely learned fellow. And as a result of his criticisms of Arabic lexicography, he wrote a companion volume to Al-Jasus al-Qamus called Sirrul Dayal fil Qalb wal Ibdal. These are very rare books. They're very hard to find. There are no modern editions that I know of. And I found copies in the library of the American University of Cairo, both of these, when I lived in Egypt. And I checked them out, and then I took them to a person who very carefully photocopied them on very nice archival paper. And then I had them exquisitely bound here. And of course you have the title and you have my name as well on the book, on both of them like this. So these are extremely important books. He talked about how entries were organized in classical Arabic dictionaries and how they weren't very systematic, and he felt that you should start with all of the standard forms of a verb because they're organized by verb. You should start with fa'ala and fa'ila and fu'ila, and then what they break down into, and then you should go to fa'ala and so forth. And he had a whole sort of idea about how things should be done. He said you should deal with the literal meanings before you deal with other meanings. In other words, you deal with haqiqa before you deal with majaz. And he had an entire understanding of the manipulation, the permutation and combination of Arabic root letters, and how that's reflected in meaning. Now that's a very, very old idea in Arabic linguistics and in fiqh al-lugha texts that go back to people like Ibn Jinni. Ibn Jinni wrote a remarkable series of studies. One of them is called Al-Kitab al-Khasa'is in 3 volumes. It's very profound work. And Shiddiaq, of course, is much, much later, but it shows you the sort of continuity of Arabic linguistics. There were even dictionaries of this kind being written in northern India into the 20th century. So among other specialized dictionaries in the Arabic language, there's a couple which I want to mention, and then we'll wind this video up. This is called the Kashaf Istirahat al-Funun. This is a dictionary which has been compiled again by another Indian scholar who died in 1158, Muhammad Ali ibn Muhammad Thanvi, or At-Tahanawi, but Thanvi, from Thana Bhavan. He was Hanafi. This is Darul Kutub al-Ilmiya, and this is 4 volumes. So this is a dictionary of technical terms that are used in the Islamic intellectual disciplines. And it's a very, very important book. Another book of the same kind, I had to turn it on, is the Dastur al-Ulama by, it's Dastur al-Ulama au Jam' al-Ulum fi Istirahat al-Funun, by someone named Ahmad Nagari, another Indian from Ahmad Nagar, Al-Qadi, Abdul Nabi ibn Abdul Rasul Al-Ahmad Al-Nagari, Al-Ahmad Nagari. This is also, in some ways, this is better than the other one. So if you want to look up the meaning of some term, which you find in a book of grammar or poetry or law or jurisprudence or astronomy or even some of the occult sciences, you will find it in this book. It's an astonishingly well done work. So I'd like to close this off. We could be here for hours and hours talking about my various dictionaries. But the most recent dictionary I bought, which I'd known about for many years, but I could never find a good edition, is a very hilarious book in some ways. The title, it's called Hobson Jobson, a glossary of Anglo-Indian colloquial words and phrases. And this is a really good hardcover edition. Here, look at this. Look at that. It's very nice. It's got this nice typeface on the title page. So what is this book? Well, this is a book that was put together by someone named Colonel Henry Ewell and A.C. Burnell. New edition edited by William Crook, B.A., no less. What is this? Well, this is about the peculiar sort of English that emerged during the years of the British misadventure in India. And it is called Hobson Jobson. So you might be wondering about that. Is that Hobson Jobson? What does that mean? Is that a reference to the original compilers or authors? No, it's not. I will read you the entry under Hobson Jobson because this was a phrase. Here it is. This is on page 419. It starts in this column at the very bottom, Hobson Jobson, page 419, then it continues on the top. I quote, Hobson Jobson, a native festal excitement, a tamasha. Tamasha is a Persian word, means spectacle, but especially the Muharram ceremonies. This phrase may be taken as a typical one of the most highly assimilated class of Anglo-Indian argot, and we have ventured to borrow from it a concise alternative title for this glossary. He means this book. It is peculiar to the British soldier and his surroundings with whom it probably originated, and with whom it is by no means obsolete, as we once supposed. My friend, Major John Trotter, tells me that he has repeatedly heard it used by British soldiers in the Punjab, and has heard it also from a regimental munshi. Munshi was a kind of chancellery scribe type individual, used to write documents. It is in fact an Anglo-Saxon version of the wailings of the Mohammedans, as he says, as they beat their breasts in the procession of Muharram, chanting, Ya Hassan, Ya Hussein. So Hobson Jobson is the corruption of Ya Hassan, Ya Hussein. Very interesting. He continues, it is to be remembered that these observations are in India by no means confined to Shias. Except at Lucknow and Murshidabad, the great majority of Mohammedans in the country are professed Sunnis. Yet there is a statement of the facts, etc., etc. So this is the background to the title of this book, Hobson Jobson. And it's just full of all sorts of usages which you don't really find anymore. But if you go to India, you will find people perhaps still using some of these phrases and words and terms. So it represents an interesting geographical or historical aspect of the English language linked to geography. In other words, India in particular, and then the British and so forth. So there you have it, just a bunch of different dictionaries and my thoughts on the degeneration of English, and of course, again, most importantly, this new kind of emerging epistemic colonialism or hegemony, an attempt by the powers that be to colonize, as it were, our minds, to colonize language itself, and therefore to corrupt it and bend it to their own sinister goals, and thereby weaponize it and transform it into a tool, a sinister kind of weapon to manipulate human beings, to manipulate society as a means of social engineering, to bend people towards whatever nefarious designs they deem to be strategically opportune at the moment, and to have everyone conform. So do not conform, study languages, look at dictionaries, and keep learning. Thank you for watching.